The avoidant has never been undone by beauty. They have been undone by the person who sat across from them and made the performance of not needing feel, for the first time, like the loneliest possible way to live. Lust, the avoidant can manage. This needs to be stated plainly at the outset because it reframes everything that follows. Physical attraction, the immediate surface-level pull of someone's presence, the straightforward desire generated by proximity and chemistry, and the uncomplicated pleasure of finding another person beautiful, does not threaten the avoidant's equilibrium in any meaningful way. They are as capable of experiencing it as anyone, and in some respects more comfortable with it than with deeper forms of attraction, precisely because it can be felt and acted upon and enjoyed without requiring the vulnerability that genuine psychological connection demands. Lust keeps its distance from the interior. It operates in the body without requiring the self. And the self, specifically the protected, defended, carefully managed self that the avoidant has constructed around their fear of genuine exposure, is exactly what they need to keep at a safe distance from the experience of being attracted to someone. Which is why the things that truly undo the avoidant, the things that produce in them a depth of draw that lust never reaches, are not physical at all. They are psychological. They are the specific qualities and behaviors that make contact not with the avoidant's body, but with the defended interior of a person who has spent their relational life ensuring that the interior remains inaccessible. When something reaches it, when the draw goes past the surface and lands in the place the avoidant works hardest to protect, the response is not the manageable, contained, self-protective experience of ordinary desire. It is something far more significant, far more destabilizing, and far more permanent in its effects. These are the 4 psychological qualities that hit the avoidant harder than lust ever could. The first, the specific intelligence of someone who thinks for themselves. Not intelligence in the general, accessible sense, not the intelligence that is visible in credentials or demonstrated in the performance of competence in particular domains. The avoidant is not especially undone by intelligence as an abstract quality. What undoes them is a specific kind of intelligence that is rarer and more personal than the general category can convey. It is the intelligence of genuine independent thought, of someone who has arrived at their views about the world, about people, about ideas that matter through their own examination rather than through the adoption of the positions that their environment made most available and most socially comfortable to hold. Someone who will disagree with the consensus not because disagreement is their brand, not because contrarianism is the posture they have chosen, but because they have actually looked at the thing the consensus is saying and found it incomplete or wrong. Someone whose mind does not simply receive the world, but engages with it, actively, curiously, with the specific pleasure of a person who genuinely enjoys the process of thinking rather than simply the arrival at conclusions. This quality hits the avoidant in a very specific place. The avoidant, whose interior life is rich and complicated and full of views and perceptions that do not always align with what the social environment rewards, has spent most of their relational life in the particular loneliness of being the most perceptive person in a conversation without a genuine interlocutor. Not because others are unintelligent, but because the specific kind of engagement their mind craves requires a quality of intellectual independence that in their experience is genuinely rare. When they encounter it, when someone pushes back on something they have said with a counter-argument that is not simply the opposite position, but a genuinely different angle, one they had not considered, one that makes them want to think rather than defend, something happens in the avoidant that lust has never produced. Their mind becomes interested, not in the polite, manageable sense of finding a topic worthwhile. In the deep, involuntary, this is the thing I have been, waiting for without knowing I was, waiting sense of genuine intellectual encounter. Their attention moves toward this person in a way that is not easily redirected. Their desire to continue the conversation, not as a social obligation, but as a genuine want, arrives without requiring any decision. The avoidant does not fall for people who agree with them. They fall for people who make agreeing unnecessary because the disagreement is more interesting than any agreement could be. The second, the capacity to carry pain without becoming it. The avoidant has a complicated relationship with other people's suffering. On the surface, it presents as discomfort, the familiar retreat from emotional intensity that characterizes the avoidance management of intimacy at depth. They minimize, deflect, problem solve prematurely, doing what their nervous system learned to do in the presence of strong feeling, which is to reduce it to manageable proportions as quickly as possible. But beneath the discomfort, there is something else. A quality of attention that the avoidant brings to people in pain that they cannot easily explain and do not often acknowledge. They notice more than they show. The person who is carrying something difficult registers in the avoidance awareness with a clarity and a specificity that ordinary social interaction does not produce. And the way that person carries their difficulty, the specific quality of how they inhabit their own suffering, is something the avoidant observes with a depth of attention that, if it were acknowledged openly, would reveal far more investment than their surface behavior suggests. What they are looking for in that watching is someone who carries pain without becoming it. This is the quality that hits them harder than almost anything else. Not the absence of pain. The avoidant is not drawn to people who appear untouched by difficulty because the untouched read as either dishonest or superficial, and the avoidant cannot bond to either. But the specific quality of someone who has been genuinely, deeply affected by their life, who carries the marks of it, who does not pretend the hard things were not hard, and who has somehow, through whatever combination of inner resource and hard-won perspective, arrived at a place of sufficient groundedness that the pain has not become the totality of who they are. This person is not performing resilience. They are not packaging their suffering into an inspirational narrative. They are simply present with their own history in a way that is honest without being consumed, that acknowledges what was difficult without requiring the world to organize itself around the difficulty. And the avoidant, who has spent their entire life managing their own interior pain through suppression rather than through the genuine metabolization that this quality represents, is in the presence of something they have been looking for without knowing how to name it. What they are seeing is the possibility that pain does not have to be hidden to be survived. That the choice is not between suppression and destruction. That there is a third thing, a way of carrying the real weight of a real life while remaining genuinely, fully present in it. The person who demonstrates this possibility does not just attract the avoidant. They change something in the architecture of what the avoidant believes about themselves and their own interior. The third, the willingness to be interested without being impressed. The avoidance experience of being desired is almost always complicated by a particular awareness. The person who desires them has, in most cases, constructed some version of them in their mind, an image built from the qualities the avoidant presents, the competence they demonstrate, the specific kind of magnetism that the avoidant self-containment tends to generate in people who are drawn to what they cannot easily reach. This constructed image is not you. It is a projection, a response to the performance rather than to the performer. And the avoidant knows this. They can feel the difference between being desired and being seen, between someone who wants the version of them they have been presenting and someone who is actually curious about the version underneath it. The first kind of desire is, in a quiet way, alienating. It compounds the loneliness of the performance by making the performance successful, confirming that what people want is the surface rather than the substance. The quality that undoes the avoidant is the specific quality of someone who is interested without being impressed, who does not perform fascination at the avoidant's self-contained magnetism, but instead looks through it, gently, without aggression, with the simple curiosity of someone who finds the person behind the performance more interesting than the performance itself, who asks the question that nobody asks because it requires looking past what the avoidant is so skillfully presenting, who seems in the quality of their attention, not dazzled by the avoidant, but genuinely, specifically, unhurriedly interested in who they actually are. This kind of attention is extraordinarily rare in the avoidance experience, and extraordinarily difficult to defend against, because the avoidance defenses were designed to manage the approach of people who want what they present. They were not designed to manage someone who is interested, quietly and persistently, in what they protect. The person who is interested without being impressed does not need the performance to continue. They are patient in the specific way of someone who is not waiting for the avoidant to be impressive, but simply waiting, without urgency, without demand, for the avoidant to be real, and that patience, directed not at the surface but at the interior, has a quality that the avoidant's most carefully constructed defenses cannot indefinitely resist. Not because the patience is a strategy that wears the defenses down, but because the interest is genuine, and genuine interest in who they actually are is the one thing the avoidant has always needed most and trusted least to find. The fourth, the groundedness that makes drama unnecessary. The avoidant has been, throughout their relational life, consistently on guard against a specific kind of emotional intensity, not the genuine depth of feeling, though they struggle with that too, for different reasons, but the performed intensity, the drama that substitutes for depth, the emotional volatility that is not the expression of genuine feeling, but the ongoing creation of situations that require attention, require management, require the other person to be continuously oriented toward the drama rather than toward the relationship itself. This intensity is exhausting to the avoidant in a way that goes beyond preference or temperament. It activates the vigilance, the continuous low-level monitoring of the emotional weather that the avoidant maintains in all close relationships, at maximum capacity. It requires them to be constantly responsive to the next development, the next crisis, the next escalation of feeling that demands engagement, and the constant responsiveness required is both exhausting and destabilizing. It does not allow the avoidant the internal space they need to experience genuine closeness, because all available internal space is consumed by the management of the emotional intensity. The person who is genuinely, constitutionally grounded, whose equanimity is not the performed calm of someone suppressing what they feel, but the real, stable, self-generating steadiness of a person who has a secure relationship with their own interior, does something to the avoidance vigilance that nothing else achieves. It disarms it, not through any action directed at the vigilance itself, simply through the sustained, demonstrated absence of the threat the vigilance was designed to manage. In the presence of real groundedness, the avoidance monitoring finds nothing requiring continuous management. The emotional weather is clear and consistent, not because nothing is happening, but because the person's stability does not require the avoidance responsiveness to maintain itself. They are simply present, steady, engaged without being consuming, warm without being destabilizing, entirely reliably themselves, regardless of external circumstance. This steadiness creates something in the avoidant that their history has made almost entirely foreign: internal space. Room, within the experience of being close to someone, for the genuine quality of the closeness to be felt rather than only managed. Room to actually experience who this person is, rather than being consumed by the demands their emotional intensity creates. And in that room, in that specific and unfamiliar spaciousness, the avoidant discovers something they did not know was still available to them: the capacity to actually enjoy being close to someone. Not despite the closeness, because of it. These four qualities do not simply attract the avoidant. They reach the place that attraction cannot reach. The defended, protected, carefully maintained interior of a person who has been managing the distance between themselves and genuine connection for so long that the management has started to feel like identity. They do not dismantle the walls. They make the person inside the walls wonder, for the first time with genuine seriousness, whether the walls were ever the protection they were built to be, or simply the longest, most elaborate way of being alone that fear ever invented.